All right, great. So let me go back to sharing the screen. Screen that. All right, so let's start off a little bit. WordPress news and events. This time of year, things are a little bit light, but I was surprised. I noticed today when I signed up my website, one of my websites, that WordPress 6.0.3 was released today. I dug a little bit into the release log. It looks like it's primarily security related fixes. I would almost say entirely security related fixes. There might be some other things mixed in there. Unfortunately, they're not addressing any high or critical level security issues. You can, take a look at the link below, or obviously go to WordPress.org, search for 6.0.3, and you can see what's in the release. So again, for these types of releases, especially security ones, we obviously encourage people to do the update. But as with any update, the normal rules apply. Make sure it's backed up. Try to do it on a staging site first, et cetera, et cetera. So this doesn't look like a really significant release in terms of having an impact to your sites. So that came out today. And another one to bring to your attention is coming up next month, so November 2nd and 3rd. This is a topic that Peter and I have talked about a few times, of hopefully trying to get something for our meetup here, at least discussing this topic about accessibility. So WordPress, it has a real focus on accessibility, and that's something that they do talk about a lot and put time and resources into it. So if you get a chance, sign up for it. It's free, just like most of their conferences are. It's like I said, it's 24-hour. There's gonna be a lot of different sessions. They've already posted the sessions online, so you can take a look and see what the topics are going to be. But really, the goal of it is it's dedicated to promoting and learning website accessibility best practices. So I think it's very important these days, especially depending on who your audience is on your site. I think it's good to learn best practices from that. So check it out. I'll put the link afterwards in the chat as well. Oops, and that's all I had for news. So Peter, do you have a tip or plugin spotlight?
I do. And while I'm grabbing the screen, the other thing for news, and I think we'll talk about it more next time, but it will be WordPress 6.1 will have been released by the time our next meetup. And there's a lot coming in 6.1 that's going to be pretty helpful. Can you see my screen now?
Yep.
Okay. And you see release candidate 1 now there? Okay, yep. Great. So yeah, so that's something that's coming up, and I've been looking into it, and some of the things that I'm really happy about, and we'll talk more in depth after the release. There's some excellent improvements to the editor, again, continuously improving that. But one of the things that's kind of interesting is that some of the key things, theme dependent, depending on if your theme does or doesn't implement. So it's interesting if you go and you see something that talks about a new feature, and you go, how come I don't see it? It may be defined by your theme. So that's just a caveat going into it. We'll talk more next week. All right. So my tip this week, a while back, I shared with the group a site called InstaWP for spinning up WordPress websites. I found a new one called TasteWP.com. And this one is got some pretty cool features built into it. First of all, if you go to TasteWP, you can start without signing in. I have signed in. You have benefits of signing in. Even for free, you get to have like 5 or 6 free websites running, and they run for 7 days instead of 2 days. These are instant spin up sites, but the tools that they built into this thing are pretty jazzy. So the first thing is, first of all, you'll be surprised at the speed. So say if I wanted to just set up a temporary WordPress site on their servers that I can just use and try. So it's literally, you can just click set it up, go to TasteWP, set it up. And that fast, I have a website that I can take. It's really fast. It's crazy fast. So that's showing me now. The one cost of their entry is under plugins, you do have, oh, let me close this. Okay, got it. You do have this company's, the plugins that they've put together. Not a big deal. You can deactivate them, you can play with them. But then let me show you a couple of things really quick that's pretty interesting. So if you went to a, say you were on WordPress.org and you go to a plugin, and when you're looking at the plugin, you might say, I'm interested in, I don't know, let's say, tonight we're talking about CSS editors, or maybe it's the code snippet one. So say it's code snippets. You're looking at it going, I want to give it a try, but I want to load in my site. And I'm looking at this from the idea that sometimes when you go to look at a WordPress plugin, all you see is those few thumbnails. And I could tell a lot once I load it, whether I like the interface and things like that. Well, here's something pretty cool. If you're over here and you're looking at the code snippet and you say, I wonder how that works. If you go up to the WordPress.org and type in tastewp.com with the same URL, I literally just replaced it. It's going to spin up a website for me. I'll show you two more things after this that are pretty cool. It's going to show it's going to spin up a new website preloading the code snippet plugin. So now I can test that. I could take a look at that plugin here, or say you were interested in like I don't know, a gallery plugin or carousel or something like that. You weren't sure, load one up, you can go and you can add more, and you can take a look at them and you can compare them. Now with my sign in, I have 7 days and 36 seconds that this is going to last. So very, very cool. And taking it one more step. 2 more steps. I'll show you something I did, and then I don't want to. But this is like, it's pretty cool. If you go here, they also have an advanced setup where you can start, doing some selections on what you may or may not want to put in to your choices. And I even went one step further, and I created. Say I wanted to check that I was just playing with this, and I said, "Wow, this thing is weirdly super flexible." And say again, maybe I'm looking at that code snippet. I'm thinking I might put this somewhere for people to use. Say I wanted to check that that code snippet, and I was like, well, I also load. I often load a Cadence site, Generate Press, even with some other things. And I was like, you know what? Can I create a little form that goes and grabs that URL, pulls out what they need, add some preloaded stuff, and now I'm going to have a Generate Press site with a couple of Generate Press plugins with, it's going to also load, it jumps to, with the
Generate block?
So this was, so what I did was I set up a string with the generate blocks, generate press and all, and then said, and add the one plugin that I want to do, because say if I'm testing it, I want to give it a closer to my own setup. Anyway, had a lot of fun with this. I'm doing all of this for free at this point. If I go back to, where's my cursor? There it is. If I go back to Taste and I go to my account here, just to show you, it's going to show me, well, let's do this. It's going to show me the sites that I just spun up with their wacky names. You can change the names and I can delete them. You can say you set something up here that you like, you can migrate it to your host. You can do all kinds. You're just running up a website. Very cool tool. You could probably spend the next hour just playing with it. But I heard the developer on one of the podcasts I listened to. I took a look and I said, wow, this is pretty snappy. So there you go. TasteWP.com.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it really is.
Cool. Thanks, Peter.
All right. I will unshare, right? Right.
Yep.
If I can find it.
Yeah, really good.
Somebody's asking Peter, what podcast were you listening to that you heard that?
That one was, I think it was the WP Tavern, the WP Jukebox that you grab the screen, thanks.
Yeah.
Nathan Wrigley does. So WP Builds, I think it was one of his, because now he's got multiple. It may have even been the WP Builds. Every other week they do an interview. It might have been that one, WPBuilds.com. Love Nathan Wrigley's podcast. Very, very good. Anyway, there you go.
All right, awesome. Always a good tool or tip. All right, so let's dive into our topic tonight, which is getting started with CSS. Again, this is dipping your toes into CSS or something. So it's a lot to learn here, but we're just gonna cover kind of the high level basics. So here's our agenda for tonight. Peter and I will do quick introductions of who we are. Peter's going to cover just basics. What is CSS? I know we have a lot of beginners who maybe aren't familiar with what it even means. And I'll show some of the syntax of CSS, just so you're familiar with it. Again, you won't be an expert from seeing this, but just to get more familiarity. And Peter's really going to cover, I think, which is the core of maybe most people on this call, what you need to know. How does CSS work within WordPress? And just kind of tying those pieces together. And then I'm going to give, I say around 15 minutes, depends how much time we have, some practical CSS examples, some things that you may need to do at some point, and just at least it's nice to know how you can do them in CSS. Then we'll kind of wrap up with some final thoughts for the resources, and then Q&A for this, and then whatever remaining time we have left, we'll just do a general Q&A for anything. So real quick about myself, I'm Ray. I'm one of the co-organizers of the Hartford WordPress group. I've been involved in IT, as a developer / architect for 25 plus years. I really didn't do a lot of CSS for the majority of that. Probably towards the end, as I was doing some more web apps. So I learned mostly I learned a lot of CSS as I was learning WordPress. So for me, the two have always kind of gone together. I've been using WordPress around 6+ years now. Self-employed as a website developer. I live in Newington, Connecticut, married, no kids. We still have one crazy old cat, and I'm a geek. Peter.
Yeah, I'm Peter Ingersoll. I've been using technology for marketing communication for a long time now. Started building websites at the beginning of building websites. Most of that came from working at our state paper, the primary paper in the state called the Hartford Current. Then worked for advertising agencies. I'm self-taught. And I spent a lot of time in WordPress groups and podcasts and things like that. Really enjoy that kind of learning and interactivity. The WordPress community is wide and vast and interesting. I live in South Windsor, Connecticut. I'm married with 2 adult children and 3 cats, who may or may not interrupt us sometime today. So.
Cool. All right. So let's dive in here. So Peter, I can do the slides for you. So
yeah, do the slides. I'll grab the share screen because I do want to do like one quick demo. And sure. The other thing I'm going to do, I also want to do quickly because I'm more interested in what Ray's going to do and showing practical examples. So we both learn from each other. All right. So the first thing we're going to start with, and again, in setting context and having, especially people who are new to WordPress, website development itself and the whole thing, go and use a website. But let's talk about web page code in a completely and very oversimplified way. And you've got a browser, you're looking at a website, your browser is interpreting the code that it receives from the server that is sending that information to you. And there's a number of things that are being sent. But in terms of code, primarily you're looking at HTML, which is the hypertext, that's markup language, not market language. Oh, see what happens when hypertext markup language. That was my fault. I feel like it's a market language, right? But there you go. Thank you. Markup language. And a markup language is a language that says it's a tagged language. It's kind of like, if you're writing in Microsoft Word and you bold something, you make it bold. In hypertext markup language, the code says, here's the word, and at the beginning of the word, there's code that says make it bold or make it strong. And at the end of the word that you want to be, it's like stop making it strong because now you're doing something else. So the browser is interpreting all this markup to know how to display at display a thing at a basic level. And HTML, these are headings, the paragraphs, the links, the images, tables, all of those things that are put into a website. And if you're like me and you can go back to the mid 90s looking at websites, websites were not particularly pretty, because we were limited in what we could do, and HTML was the way we're doing it. In fact, we'll talk maybe the second half of this and see if anybody is experiencing things like what we call table-based design, where you had tables and you put images and things in it, and that's how a web page was designed. Cascading style sheets, that's the code that defines how things look. And when cascading style sheets were introduced, I don't remember exactly when, it changed everything as far as how the web worked and how websites work. Is fantastic, and we're going to be talking about that. But you have the thing, and then you have how the thing looks. That's defined by cascading style sheets. JavaScript also code. Again, if you, I'd probably say these, the top three. And that's code that then the browser, if you have JavaScript turned on, will know how to, do things more interactively, or, sometimes when you're seeing things move or fade or whatever, that's coding that is now kind of talking interactively to your browser to add more dynamic content. Now, if we talk about next slide, yep, CSS directly. So CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets. It tells the browser how to display all the things on the page, as I described. So a few of the examples of what you're doing in terms of how you're describing things might be the font size, colors, borders, spacing, placement on the page, and even these things on different screen sizes. So it really is all the things that says how to push up onto the screen all the things that are on the site. And as you know, if you've got a good website, a modern website that is responsive, you look on your phone, it looks differently. That's your CSS, being able to understand, okay, this device has a different view window, a different amount of its size. So my code will know, the CSS will know, and that's very nicely built into most WordPress themes now, in terms of being able to adapt that content depending on what device the viewer is using, what the window size is. CSS, that actual code can be loaded by files in the header on the web page, or in line with the content. There are other ways that it can also be loaded, but that's basically what it is. It's this big block of description on how to display things, very often loaded in files, but you can see, and we'll spend some time looking kind of behind the scenes on the types of code that type of CSS that is describing how to display those elements. The reason we've got the word cascade, CSS, it cascades. The styles are loaded in a sequence. You literally have, if you're loading a style on a paragraph and then another version of that paragraph style, another one after, it's the last one that's going to be actually applied. And this is actually quite powerful because it allows you to do things like, say, all paragraphs work a certain way, but I have this one paragraph I want to treat differently. So take everything that now I'm going to change that one thing. Ray, I think you're going to get into a little bit more details on some of the cascading, but that's why the word cascade is there, because you can tell something to do something 10 times. It's the last one, or that last piece of the one thing that's going to be applied as it cascades down. And now we were talking a little bit right before the call, advanced CSS has almost programming like capabilities. And what I mean by that is, it's things that it'll know, is this the first thing in a list? Is this, what number row table am I on? It's doing calculations on the back end and things like that. And that's when we get into some pretty advanced stuff in style sheets. I think right now, yep, I'm going to grab the screen because I just want to show two things real quick. Where's my main window there? Get that one, share this. And we'll spend more time, Ray, you're going to, I think, spend more time in this, but this is a site that if you really want to start learning things like CSS, The W3 schools, it's been around since the beginning. Really, really good stuff. And what's really nice about the tutorials that you have in W3 schools is that you can interact with them and see things that happen. So this is CSS that is saying, okay, an H1, make it white, text line center. This is the thing. This is what to do with the thing now. And what's nice in the schools is that you can test this out, and it's saying, okay, style, body. Now, body is the element, rail getting details, but if we wanted to make this green, and there's a lot of ways to describe colors, and now run that. Now it's taking the back end. So this is, again, you've got the thing and how you describe how it looks. And one quick thing to show you too, in terms of, all right, so here is, we all know this site. This is how we got here, the Meetup site. I've got a bookmarklet. I like bookmarklets. I think they're underutilized. It's JavaScript that just applies something. If I look at this page and we just we see all that it does, if I remove the CSS, this is what the page actually initially looks like to the browser. And by the way, this is kind of typically what it looks like to Google, for example, if you're looking at SEO. But you can see all of that, putting things in boxes and putting shades and colors. This is kind of what the site looks like on the back end. I mean, without style sheets applied. So you can really see where all the power comes from in terms of style sheets. So this is, if I reload all of those things on that page, they are all positioned, they all have the font, they all have the colors because of CSS, because of the style sheet. So that is your quick intro to cascading style sheets.
Cool.
Any questions on that?
I like that little stripping the CSS.
It's so cool. You go in and you go, oh my gosh, to see this is what's really going on. And by the way, if anyone's ever run into this issue, why did my site look really horrible, terrible? It looks like it's, an old version of Craigslist or something. Could be that your style sheet didn't load, which is.
Then you look for errors. Yeah, that's when you look for errors in the window or refresh. Hard refresh.
Oh, yeah. Hopefully refreshing takes care of everything.
Yeah.
So
Cool.
there you go.
All right, no, that's great. So that's hopefully gives people an idea of a quick level of what CSS is. So now, I mean, the thing that I think that intimidates people, especially if you're not a developer, is it is, so CSS has its own language and its own syntax. When you first look at it, it looks weird. It really does look very strange, but it's actually a lot simpler than other languages. Like JavaScript has a very rich vocabulary. CSS, for the most part, is pretty straightforward, at least in terms of the syntax. What you can do, and Sue said this as well, is there's tons and tons of commands, but just from a syntax standpoint, hopefully I'll help you understand it a little bit better. So here's really the basics of CSS syntax. And I got this from W3 Schools because, again, they're a fantastic resource for learning HTML, JavaScript, everything. A CSS rule consists of a selector and a declaration block. So I'll talk about each of these pieces separately, but here's an example of a rule. So here's a sample rule. So in this case, the way I would read this is, on this web page, I'm going to select the H1, that's the heading, an H1 heading element. And what it's going to do is it's going to change the color, the font color to blue, and it's going to change the font size of that heading to 12 pixels. So, the way this thing is laid out in this example, they're following kind of bad form that they're putting it all in one line. But typically, you'd see this broken apart. You'd see brackets around it. And when I show the demo later, I'll show you some examples of how to make it a little bit easier for people to read. But that's really the gist of it. It's a selector and a declaration. Those are the two things you need to have valid CSS. So let's start with the selector part of it first. So the language, as Peter said too, CSS has gotten a lot more complicated over time as the web has gotten more complicated. So some people may have heard, this talk even a few years ago about HTML5. This was the big thing. Everything's going HTML5. And what does that mean? Well, part of it was just a lot of these languages, JavaScript, CSS, HTML, they got more powerful because the web has changed a lot from those old days of, screen readers, et cetera. So As part of that, CSS now is really gotten more powerful in terms of what you can do, and it's, as I said, it's turned into its own kind of rich language in itself. So from a selector standpoint, there's really what a selector is that's the way that you target some specific HTML element on a web page. So as Peter said before, an HTML element could be a paragraph, it could be a heading block, it could be a div, it could be a button, et cetera, et cetera. So the ways that you can target a specific one to apply a rule is you can specify either something simple. So a simple selector is you just specify the element's name, ID, or class. And I'll show examples of this later, but that's the most basic one. That's probably the one you'll see the most. But it can get more complex. You can do these things like combinators. That's like a child of an element. Pseudo classes. So pseudo class would be something like you can put elements before and after other elements. You can basically introduce. And this is where CSS has got a little bit in the gray area. You can actually introduce content, add content to an HTML document through CSS. And again, CSS was supposed to be all about styling, but it's gotten even more powerful than that. A pseudo element, this is around the state of something. So for example, a button, if a button's been hovered over by a mouse or clicked or something like that, or a hyperlink, if it's been clicked, you can inspect that and say, I want to select all of the clicked hyperlinks in this document and do something, change styling on it. And then attribute is another thing too that we probably won't show an example of that, but HTML, you can also have attributes on elements. So you can select something specifically that way. I would say for beginners and tonight's purposes, we're really going to stick with simple selectors, but just be aware of the fact that there's a lot more complex stuff out there. So I always go back to this. Once you start to see the power of CSS, you've almost got to reframe some things you normally would do and say, hey, wait a minute, I wonder if I can do this in CSS. And usually the answer is, yeah, you probably can. So again, this is the selector part of it. So this is saying, what am I going to apply this rule to? So there's different ways to target things in your web page. Now the declaration part of it, that's where the rule is going to happen. The declaration is really the styling rule that you want to apply, and that rule is made up of a property value pair. So just to look at this again, property value pair, each declaration starts with a semicolon, or sorry, ends with a semicolon, and they're wrapped in brackets. So going back to this example, this is a value pair. So property value. Property is color. Value I'm setting it to is blue. Property is font size. I'm setting it to a value of 12 pixels or whatever. So that's all it really is. At its most basic, you can just have a single one of these as a rule. Like, this one could have just been, I want to set all my headings to blue. That would have just been, forget about the second piece. You would just have color blue, and that's a valid CSS rule. So the declaration part of it, again, that's really the meat of it. The first part is find this thing. Now this is apply this other thing. So what you're changing, so this is like, oh, that sounds simple, but one of the things that's complicated about CSS, or not complicated, but it can be intimidating, is how do I know all these properties? So early on I was like, how do you know that you can change colors of fonts? How do I know I can change font sizes? Tell me all the things I can do on fonts. Well, that's where I think Sue mentioned earlier too. One of the best resources, you can buy a book, I got my old CSS books behind me, but one of the best resources is things like W3 Schools. So W3 Schools, this will tell you basically, if I want to look at fonts, what can I do with fonts? I can change font families, I can change font sizes, et cetera, et cetera. So these are really good resources for you just to figure out what you can do. And again, I'll show some simple examples of things that you're probably likely to do later, but just be aware that's where a lot of the power comes in, because depending on the type of element, you may be able to change a lot of different properties of that element, and not every property applies to every element, which makes sense if you think about it. If you have an image, you can't change the font size of an image, or you can't change the color of an image necessarily. You have to do other stuff. So that's properties. So again, properties they're really the styles or behaviors that you can assign to an element. So some examples I already talked about: font styles, colors, background images, border, margin, padding, position, visibility, and I'll show some of these later when I do the examples. So the thing is, there's hundreds of these out there, and again, they're specific to each element type. So you don't memorize them all. You just need to find a good resource you can go back to and refer to. Some other concepts I'll throw out there. Peter already touched upon a couple of these. These are more, again, these might go over your head a little bit, but these are just things to be aware of. One is this idea of inheritance. So when you looked at like the HTML documents, when Peter went to the Meetup page, he stripped off the CSS, it just looked like everything was kind of, there in a line, and that there was no relationship there. But if you actually went behind the scenes and clicked on the HTML view, which we'll look at a little bit later, there is a structure and a hierarchy to an HTML document. So that's just something to be aware of. And where you run into this quite a bit is that, parents pass things down to their children. There's the idea of inheritance, so you may look at something like your button saying, where the heck is it getting this property from? Well, it's probably from its parents. It's something farther up, and you have to follow the chain, and there's tools that help you figure that out. So something to be aware of when you apply a property, it may get inherited by children of a parent. And that sort of follows this next one of cascading. This one's similar, but a little bit different in the sense that, as Peter said, you can really, you can load CSS from multiple places. And in WordPress in particular, you may have a lot of places to look for and say, where the heck is the CSS coming from? Well, again, styles do get passed down in a certain order. There is the browser does have some preference for things. And just one thing to be aware of is, this is probably a good rule of thumb, the closer the style declaration or rule is to the element, the higher the priority in general. So what I mean by that is you can actually, and if we have time today, I'll show you that you can actually hard code CSS styles into HTML. You can put it in there. I mean, that's the closest you can get to an element. We'll see in WordPress there's places that are just as close. So those get the highest priority as opposed to things that are in style, in external files and all that. So again, something to be aware of from a cascading standpoint. And finally, I'll show some examples of this later. This is the idea of specificity. And this goes back to the selectors. So the more specific a selector is, the more priority that's given to that rule. So we'll see a lot of examples later when we look at a couple of pages where, depending on your theme, a plugin, many different things on your site could all be applying a rule that, because of the parent-child relationship, because these other things, which rule wins? Well, the more specific the rule, the more priority it gets. And there's a whole, I think on W3 Schools, they even show like some scoring thing. So here's just a couple examples. So inline styles, this is what I just talked about before. You can, and this is probably not recommended, you can actually hard code, like this is a header tag, and inside of the brackets of an H1, you can say style equals blah, 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 color pink. That usually wins. That's the most specific because it's right there, right next to the element. Then this kind of goes in order of priority. Other ones are IDs. So within an HTML page, in theory, there's only one unique ID tag, for an element. So you're supposed to try to keep it unique. So if you're targeting hashtag front page, and I'll show you what these IDs look like later, that will go directly to that element. And then we get to broader things like classes and elements, et cetera, et cetera. So those are kind of higher levels. And then finally, you may see this later. This is the fail-safe, and a lot of examples will show you this. This is one of those, again, with great power comes great responsibility. There's this thing called the importance rule. So, exclamation mark important. I'll show you some examples of that. That, in theory, overrides everything else. It's like, oh, this is the rule that really applies. Use it with caution. And the reason I say that is because once you start putting those in place, suddenly you lose out on inheritance, and you start like saying, who's more important? You may actually see some themes. This is one of the criticisms of some theme builders, is some themes actually had styles that were like this with hashtag, exclamation important. That means no one can override those. You basically have to go in and edit the theme files to do that. So again, something to be aware of, probably not the best practice to use it. So real high level, that's the syntax. I think it'll make more sense as we do some examples later and show you what it looks like. But it's, considering all those other languages we talked about, CSS is fairly simple to construct, but very powerful, as we saw. All right. Peter, how does CSS work with WordPress? Oh, you're on mute, I think. You still on mute? You hard mute yourself?
I have too many windows open. I have way too many windows open. So
did any questions come? I'm sorry, Allison, did any questions come up in the chat before we go to you? I didn't see any.
some comments.
Important leads, yeah, important out of desperation. That's a good way to put it, Sue. That's the thing when you're down to why can't I get this stupid rule? Usually, again, best practice is don't give up, get more specific and all that. But yeah, there could be times where you got to bite the bullet, and important is the only way to get something done. So
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah, I've been in situations where I just couldn't find where that thing was being manipulated, and in a fit of like, well, I need to take control of this now. The exclamation important.
That's right. It just shows that's when everyone's frustrated. That's why the exclamation.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
All right, let's keep going. That's CSS with WordPress.
So CSS with WordPress, and I'm going to get this over here. All right, so in WordPress, so WordPress content management system, database that we put in our content and we describe things that get saved into a database. But the WordPress software running on a server is keeping track, is loading that, is taking that content that you're loading, and it's presenting it. One of the things that every WordPress site needs is a theme, and every theme needs a style.css file. It needs some style to begin showing what that content should look like on the screen. So the first CSS in the WordPress cascade is defined by the theme. They'll include that style.css file. And some themes offer a large, and when I say large, I mean huge number of options for using and even generating CSS. And then we can go on again beyond this, page builders and what they do, or the themes that have and that have all of this great capability to customize your stuff, but then how they're managing the CSS on the back end adds a lot more than just what the style.css has. In a lot of cases, the style.css or many versions of a CSS file on the back end of WordPress site gets referenced. So all of that style could exist, and then just gets referenced by depending on what choices you make when you're creating your content. Plugins often include their own CSS, especially if they're outputting some content, pretty much always include some level of CSS content, cascading style sheets, either in their output, or very often as that plugin's own style sheet, a separate file that gets referenced and called in at the same time, or in many cases can inject that code right into the page just by how the CSS works. And then one of the things that we're going to talk about tonight is the idea that site admins or site builders can add custom CSS. We can create our own CSS to have very, very specific control over the display of what are on our web pages. So in WordPress, there are many ways that we can add that custom CSS to our sites. Now, the first thing is you can, in fact, go in and change or add content to the style.css file in your theme, but don't do that, because if you update, anything you've done will go away. That's why we use child themes. We did a whole meetup once on child themes. You can use a child theme, which will then have its own style.css. You could put in your custom CSS there and loads. Now, a lot of times it's not, you don't need to do that. Most of the time right now, there's even a whole debate. How much more do we need child themes versus using, either plugins or what's already built into WordPress? Do we need to have a whole child theme loaded to add custom CSS? And, like every answer in WordPress, it depends. And it depends on what, including what people are comfortable with. If or if you're developing in such a way that you want to lock something down, you're an agency developing, so you may do things differently, depending on, who you are creating it and for whom you're creating something. But, the first thing, style.css in a child theme is a place where you can put custom CSS. The customizer, that is the place to put, probably the easiest place to put any kind of custom styles that you might want to use. It's built into WordPress. It's not a plugin. It's right there. It's probably the simplest approach. And if anybody's been playing with block themes in the new versions of WordPress, and block themes that have a whole different way of building templates and controlling things, you can still get to the customizer by putting in your website and then /wp admin and then customize PHP. So you could still get to the additional CSS, and I'll show that to us in a little bit. Did somebody have a question on that part? I wasn't sure if I heard. No.
Peter, I asked a question in chat. When you put CSS into the customizer, in many themes, it's not hard to get to, but do you leave it there after the site loads, or do you just move it all into the style sheet? Because it has to load on every single page if you put it in the customizer, doesn't it?
Yeah. So, and one thing about putting it in the customizer, the first thing is if you change your theme, it goes away. But if you put it in style.css, it goes away too. In other words, that's tied to the theme. So that's one of the reasons why very often folks will, again, it all depends on your approach to building websites, might use a plugin for that. Do I? No, but I don't build a lot of customs. I don't need a lot of custom CSS because of the other tools that I use.
It shouldn't, from a performance standpoint, though, it doesn't. Again, the custom CSS you put in the customizer is still just loaded once.
Yes, true.
Per page. So it's not like it's, again, if you had CSS in a child theme, that's also being loaded per page too. And usually that kind of stuff being cached anyway, at least on the server. So I wouldn't do that, worry about it from a performance standpoint.
Yeah, that's maybe we'll do, partly because I'd love to hear from other people, who are smarter than I am on things like optimizing, but that's something we're not really touching on tonight. Optimizing even CSS, minimizing code, combining.
Yeah, minimizing is, I think, going to have a better impact on CSS than not putting it in the customizer.
Right, exactly. So there's a lot of ways to do things after you've created your CSS, and so just as you mentioned, when you get it to work, where do you put it? Yeah, the answer is it depends, and very often might be using an optimization tool that minimizes and combines things. So plugins are another option, where plugins are now, the nice thing about plugins is that they are independent of your theme, so that if you do change themes, and it's funny to me, people talk often about changing themes. Yes, it's important to know that if you change themes, things could be lost if it's tied directly to the theme. The flip side is, I just don't know how much time people are changing themes like that, and if they are, they're probably not needing things like the same custom CSS that they had before. So it's an interesting topic. Maybe we'll talk about later, how much people actually change themes. But plugins, they do offer a great way, and a number of plugins will also kind of even help you write HTML, if nothing more, because the interface color codes things and things like that. So it gives you a little bit more when you get used to coding, or if you are a coder, you can get pretty advanced plugins for writing CSS. And then even inline HTML, you can literally just write style code in your page content. I never do that, or haven't in a very long time, but it is that those styles can be put in different places, and Ray touched a little bit on that before. So, okay, next. is, so I mentioned plugins. So what, now there are types of plugins we can use. Some are just for adding CSS. Then some examples are simple CSS, WP, add custom CSS. There are others. And these are plugins that pretty much add CSS. Another way, there are plugins like code snippets in WP code, which they add, and I'll show it this. We'll do a quick example of this where you have code that you can add, and you can also add PHP, which is if you're doing something like you need a functions, or JavaScript, you can add these different types of code. And those snippet plugins do include a way of putting CSS. And what's nice about it is that you can turn them on and off. And in some cases, with some of these plugins, you can get very specific to just page level. And in fact, even the simple CSS plugins will give you the ability to have a box on a page for just putting CSS for that one page. If you had just one thing you had to take care of and you didn't want to load it everywhere else, that's another advantage of some of the plugins. Then you get into, then we have much more involved CSS generators, and they're more WYSIWYG, what you see is what you get kind of thing. So more of a visual way of creating CSS. This is, I have Microthemer. These are premium plugins. Yellow Pencil does have a free version. I never use it, just partly because, again, I'm not very often getting to a point where I need to do a lot of custom CSS. And now there's so much built into, WordPress itself, for example, or if you get certain block packages that have a lot of what you need. All the spacing and the colors and the borders now being built in to, these blocks make it, some of these tools less necessary. Again, it depends on your use case. And then the whole other category of if you have page builders like Elementor, Beaver Builder, Divi, and how they handle styles, it's in their own world of generating. We won't touch on that just because pretty much if you're in those environments, you're probably, again, you're doing everything visually, and most of those do have their own way of handling CSS. Again, probably just a box instead of in the customizer. I remember when I used Beaver Builder, it was like, left menu, click down, add CSS, that type of thing. So different places to add that code. And then one thing that's actually pretty valuable is there's the very simple ability for all the blocks that you add in the block editor to assign it a custom class. That is the thing that says, okay, I'm going to give this a name, and I'm going to use, Ray touched on that earlier, classes. And now, anything I give that class, if I put that custom class code, the CSS for that class, in my whichever one of these tools that I use, now I can use that class on various blocks using when I go to install a block and tell it what class it is, and I'll show you that. So let's go try to do some quick demoing, and I think again we're going to touch on some of this stuff too, Ray, with when we get into some of the practical examples. And while I pull that up, were there any questions for either of us?
No, there were some just conversations around the different places to put CSS, kind of code snippets, which you covered.
Yeah.
I agree with Sue's point too, and you kind of just touched upon this as well, Peter, that the power of CSS versus, like, I think you may show some ways of changing, again, now, especially with the block editor, there's things you can just change at the click of a button, on a block. And you may say, well, why do I care about CSS? Well, the power of CSS is, it's really reuse. There's this programming principle called DRY, the DRY, is a don't repeat yourself principle. And that's a powerful idea, because you want to have one place where you have all of those kind of styling rules And then you can share it and reuse it throughout your site. So if you want to eventually change all your headers to blue or green or whatever, I'll show some examples of that. You don't have to go into every single block and say, change the color, 50 times or 100 times. You have one place where you did it. It changes with just one, one piece of code. So
yeah,
cool.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm going to bring up, so I have 2 sites.
Microthemer and Yellow Pencil are the 2 best ones I found.
Yeah, you saw them pop up on the screen. I have Microthemer, and yeah, I tell you, one of the things that these tools do is they help you find classes pretty
Pretty fast.
specifically. What's that?
He said pretty fast. It'll be
Pretty fast. Yeah, and Ray, were you going to show any of the like Hoverify or?
No, I'm going to show inspect. I'm going to show the inspector.
Okay, so you'll show inspect.
Diagnostic. Yeah, I'm going to do a quick like 5-minute piece of that.
Okay, I don't have Hoverify loaded on this computer, but I do have something called a
BW.
It's called Show Me the Styles. What's that? So one of the things that you can see using this extension, Show Me the Styles, it is showing that, how everything is named. This is GB generate blocks headline, and it gets into detail and tells you, what the CSS is controlling. Now it's doing that, showing you everything kind of spelled out, but that's just that's an extension. We can talk about that. Ray's going to show the inspector a little bit later. I just want to show one way, with extensions that you can get at things. Now I mentioned on the back end of WordPress, this is just a simple Astra site. Astra is another theme that I like. My themes of choice are Astra, Generate Press, and Cadence. I use Cadence the most. I haven't used Astra too much. One thing I like about Astra is they have little tools, things like a child theme generator, which is really nice. But if you go under in your site and you go to the theme file editor, this is where we don't want you to change things on your core. I'm just going to show you, and on a child theme, where you would see the fact that the CSS, oops, I hit the wrong button. The CSS on the back end, what that file looks like, because we're referencing these things. I'm going to say, I understand. I'm not going to change things. Select a theme. If I had my child theme loaded, I would select my child theme here, like my Astra child theme. I can load that, but I won't take the time now. But in there, we can see that we have.
It was on the top, I think.
Was it right at the top?
Yeah.
You can see how much I used it. Oh yeah, I'm highlighting it. Silly. And now, and this is probably going to be loading a number of other things. So this is where you get into assets, the different themes, and how they then show things. CSS. I don't want to show minified. I want to show unminified. And it just gets into a crazy way where you can start seeing, how involved all of these styles can. And again, these are cascading styles. So as things get pulled up based on what you need, we'll spend a little bit more time in sort of the practical displays of what this means. But here is the class, and then, okay, this class means make it left auto or whatever goes on. This theme, lots of style sheets tied into it. But that's but you can see how a challenge that can get. Now, if you've got a child theme and you're only putting just the changes in, that's fine. But I think a way for most of the folks that we're looking at is if we look at the site that we were building together, our shelter site, if you go appearance and then to customize, on the customizer, at the bottom, additional CSS. If I click on that, And in fact, Ray, some of these are examples. I think you put these in when we first
Yeah.
started, right? So this is some CSS that we had already put in. And look, there's the infamous
Dreaded
import.
import. I must have gotten frustrated with something as I just.
Exactly. And we said, you know what, this is like literally even in a meetup, you know, to save time, I'm just going to override whatever is not cooperating with me. And, you know, and one of the things, like, and I don't even know if there's a way to widen this. That's yet another reason why the customizer, adding custom CSS, you know, I will do something like this. And, you know, have like I use Notepad. What's nice about Notepad is if I go to language and tell it that this is CSS, that I'll get the color coding that we kind of like and all. So, you know, a lot of times it's like, okay, I don't want to work in that little box. I'm going to go into like a Notepad. This is Notepad++, which is a great free code editor without going into VS Code or things like that. Having that language colors is really nice, but you know, you can change things here and just copy and paste them back into that additional CSS box that's built into the customizer. And as I had mentioned in the slide, I'll come back here, that if you were using a block theme where the customizer wasn't initially like showing, it's not one of your menu choices because the block themes work differently, you can still go to this, you know, WP admin customize at the end of your website, and it will open up the customizer. And on a block theme, you pretty much are only going to see additional CSS, and there's one other thing, I can't remember what it is, that'll typically show there. We can bring that up later if anybody's interested, but that's one way to add custom code. And then we'll get into specific code. I want to show you kind of where you could do it. So if you had
just one point to bring back to the customizer.
Yeah.
The reason I do like the customizer is, Peter, if you want to go back into it, is it shows you, it applies the styles real time to that page you're looking at. So that's a great, you see a preview of the style it's going to apply. And there is some basic syntax checking in the customizer too. So if you try to put in a property that doesn't exist, whatever, it'll tell you a little bit of that. So it's smart in that sense. But yeah, it's a good testing ground to kind of say, oh, here's what it'll look like. And once you're happy, then you publish it. Otherwise, you can just remove it.
So a good example is like if I'm right here and this is a GB headline, let's just say, well, let's grab the whole thing. So that is the, and this is where what's the selector?
Yeah.
Okay, that is the selector. And now if I put that in and put in the code, Ray's a much better coder than I am, and then I say color is red to not use, that's what Ray's talking about. Now it's showing that selector, which I just used a simple extension in Chrome to tell me what's there. I copy that extension, and now I said, okay, the color is red. Now, I could do that in the Cadence editor, right? So this is an example of, let's show you how it works. But in Cadence, I can go to edit this page and say, make this red, which will then do the same thing a different way. But if there was something that I couldn't do in Cadence that I needed to do here, maybe there was no option. Maybe I wanted a background shadow or something like that, which may or may not be, you know, depending on which block package you use and different. This is the type of thing where now if there's special code, if I had code that made this want to move around and wiggle, which there is CSS to do, not that you should do that. I could put it here because it's not code that's built into the Cadence blocks. And if I publish this kind of not nice red and come back here and go to the home page, now that I'm reloading it, it's red. And that custom CSS and the customizer is coming after everything else. I'm not, and where it gets very complicated in the cascading, if you have something else that then comes after that, for example, that's going to take control. Or if I go to edit this page and now put in some code on the page itself, and that happens after because it's in line. Usually you don't have to worry about all that if you're just doing the kinds of changes that we're talking about. I'm going to take this out, and you know what? I'm going to put it in my little editor just so I have it on the side. Okay, so I need it later when I get rid of that. Or, you know, if I get rid of that, again, in the editor, if I change that to blue, changes to blue. But if I get this wrong, if I call this headline 2, well, it's interesting which one of these selectors is, oh, it's going to be the last one. Now, none of these match what that selector actually is because I changed the CSS. So CSS is you have to be very, very specific. If you're targeting something, you have to be very specific. I just messed up the names of these selectors. So it says, well, I don't know, you know, I don't know where GB headline text 2 is, but it's not on this page. And that's why now it defaults to what it was previously set for, to the black.
Hey, Peter, just a quick time check for you. You got a couple more minutes, I think, before.
Okay. So let me show you. So that's showing it in kind of where you're going to most use it. I'll just show you very quickly. In plugins, I think we already have code snippets. Did I have it on this? Because we've used it in the site. Nope. All right. So add new. We've shown this one before. I like the code snippets. I actually use something now called WP Code Box. I have a premium subscription to it. The WP Code, they used to have a different name, and now they're also very similar. These are the plugins that give you the ability to save your code on the site. It's separate from the theme, so that allows you to kind of manage things that way. Separate again from the theme. Am I activating? Yep. The wheel is spinning. So now if I go to snippets, that's my new plugin, gave me this new choice, and say I wanted to add well, the CSS in here, I think they've changed it because I don't see it up here as a choice.
It's not there anymore.
It's not there anymore.
No.
Well, I bet you
only in Pro.
Oh,
got it. Okay. Yeah, the other ones have. So let's add the other one, which, okay, I know this is being recorded.
we don't edit these recordings afterwards.
Yeah, I know this is recorded. There are certain plugins. There's an interesting thing about WP Code. Sue, do you know about the interesting thing about WP Code?
It's your story to tell. Tell the story.
Well,
it's a good one.
It's part of the WP Beginner world. And WP Beginner, and just a caveat I have, be careful when you go to WP Beginner videos on YouTube that train you on something. Pretty much when they say these are the best for whatever, it's their own plugins. And I'm not sure that they're always transparent about that. I'm kind of not a big fan about that. Because you want to know, like, are you giving me an unbiased, or is this because it's your plugin? And the WP Beginners, they have a whole bunch of plugins that they're always talking about, you know, how good, and they're not bad plugins. I don't mean to say that. In fact, they are some of the best. But when they're presented as the, like, pretty much the only choice, it's kind of like, I wish you were a little bit more transparent about what you were talking about. So under this one, so this, of course, they have the same name. Code snippets, add new WP code. I haven't used it, so I'm going to, it's a little bit complicated. So We won't spend time here. I was thinking the snippet one had it built in. I'm using WP Codebox. It does have a simple click here to put CSS. I'll tell you what, I'll look at that when Ray, you're doing some of your stuff, and then we'll do that. I don't want to cut into your time too much. So
Okay.
I apologize for missing
No,
that.
that's fine. I didn't know that it changed either. I mean, the power of the snippets thing, like I think you were going to show, is that you can actually you can have a snippet and turn it on and off.
Turn it on and off.
Nice.
Absolutely. And I'll figure this one out.
Okay.
I assume they have it, but why don't you grab the screen back?
Yeah, let me grab the screen back, and then one second here. All right, cool. So, oops, where's my slides? So like I said, I won't spend a lot of time on this. I do want to have time for just questions and open time. But so the thing about CSS, as I said, it's such a broad topic. It's like for most people, especially beginners, where are you really going to start coding CSS or applying CSS? And a lot of it it's changed, as Peter talked about, and others I'm sure on here are aware of. Back in the day, if you're using a pretty plain theme, you probably have to do quite a bit of CSS and quite a bit in your child's theme, etc., because a lot of themes just didn't give you much styling out of the box. They give you something and said, here you go, you can do whatever you want with CSS. But times have changed between page builders and Gutenberg, etc., which is good. I think there's things that are really simple that you shouldn't have to learn CSS. If I want to change a font size, don't make me go and type in a CSS rule, and that's kind of ridiculous. But I think where some of my practical things here is there still are going to be times where you may need to use some CSS. I'm going to show some examples of that. I'll show some with code. I'll talk about some, etc. So I think even for beginners, just being aware of the fact that you have more control, you have control of everything on a web page. So just being aware of that is kind of powerful. There's different ways to make your changes, and there's times where you need to go into CSS versus using the visual tools. So I'm gonna do a really quick couple-minute overview of the inspect tool. Again, that's the one everyone gets for free with your browser. And I'll do a couple examples. We'll show some font examples just for fun. And Peter already showed a couple, so I won't spend a lot of time on that. And then where I still use CSS the most, I mean, I use it today primarily for old sites I'm working on for clients where they don't have a page builder, it's not on Gutenberg and all that. And the only way I can get in there is writing CSS. Or even with page builders, there's still times where you need to do some precision, or the page builder just doesn't open up some properties for you. So you need to do a little bit of CSS for that. So a lot of times that's around spacing and positioning things. And then hiding elements is just a fun one that a lot of people are shocked when they see it, like, oh, that's so cool, I can do that. And there may be a time where you need that. So those are the things I'm going to cover in my demo. So let me stop sharing. I'm going to try to do it in 15 minutes if that's possible. Oh, why did I stop sharing the screen? Let me share it again. I just didn't want to share the slide. I didn't share my screen. So here's a page we're going to use just to play around with. This is on one of my sites. So the very first thing, to really be aware of for many reasons is the inspect tool. And we've covered this before. I think I did a whole session on really, the power of this tool. But for most browsers, I'm using Chrome, but the inspect tool or similar tools are also in Safari and Edge, et cetera. Once you've turned it on, and you could look up how to do that, what that allows you to do is you can double click on a page. So I'm going to click on these headings, for example. And when I right click my mouse, I get this option to say inspect. There's other tools that give you a lot more information. Peter turned me on to that tool, Hoverify, which gives you a lot more graphic view and all that. But in a pinch, I'm maybe because I learned this tool to begin with, this is the best way, or the way I kind of go back to most often to look at CSS. So it looks intimidating when you first inspect, but it's not. So when you look at this, it's really a combination of here's your HTML document in one window, and then here's your CSS rules. We won't talk about the console and that other stuff right now. But what you see here, for example, I have this heading highlighted. I've got this H2 heading highlighted. And what you see on the right-hand side, I can move my window over a little bit, is these are all of the rules that have been applied to that, or that potentially could have been applied to that element. So for example, you can see there's things that have been applied around the margins, margin width, et cetera, et cetera. And a lot of times, going back to our thing about the important tag, whatever, a lot of times the problem is just figuring out where did this rule come from? So why is this thing bold? Why, where did the font size come from? Why is this a particular size? And one other thing you always, not always, but I would highly suggest looking at is this other tab, which is computed. So this is another quick way to get some basic information. So on this heading, what's the font size? It's 48 pixels. It's a 400 width weight. So it's not quite bold. It's, but somewhere in between. What's the color, et cetera, et cetera. So here you can see some quick properties immediately on an element. So from a tool standpoint, the other nice thing is right now, this is just if any changes I do, we're going to play around in Inspector a little bit. These are only applied to my browser, this session, not to my website. You're completely safe. Anything you do here, you're not going to break your website. It's all good. So this is a sandbox. It looks a little confusing. There's other sandboxes. I think we'll share some resources later, but me personally, this is probably the first sandbox that I go to. So I'm going to start off by showing you a rule. So let's do something silly, and I think we already looked at this before. Let's change this heading. Let's do some font stuff. So let's change the font size. That's a simple one. So the rule for font size, again, how would I know that? Well, if you look through here, there's a whole bunch of information about fonts. There's text things. So here's things you can do with colors and background. So you want to refer to a resource like this, but again, I happen to know a lot of these rules. So let's just say font size, I'm going to change it to, I don't know, 80 pixels. There we go. It's changed to 80 pixels. And what you'll notice, though, is because of the fact that I have only this element highlighted, this rule is only applying to that specific element. If I wanted this to apply, and I'll show this a little bit later, to all headings, then I really want to apply to the H2 elements. That'll go across the board. That'll go across my website. All H2 headings will be a font size of 80 pixels. But this is a real quick, quick demo of that. So it's just a font size and something else silly. Color, we'll say. Color is a tricky one. Sometimes I always get tricked. It's not font color, it's just color. So these don't always follow a pattern. So let's just say color. We did red before, we'll do blue on this one, just so you can see what blue looks like. And what's neat is in these tools, they allow you the ability to actually scroll through and look at things like there's Alice blue, aquamarine, et cetera, and it'll show you on the side what it looks like. So I think my color for some reason was getting overridden by something else. Let's do weight instead, font weights. So font weight, this is whether something's bold or bolder. And as you see, as I'm scrolling through this on the left-hand side, just like with a customizer, this is showing it to me dynamically. So here's what a font weight of 900 looks like. So I click on that. So really simple example. This is changing something on a font. And from an inspector standpoint, the really cool thing is you can turn these rules on and off with just a click. So you can do that not just for the ones I typed in, I can do that for all the rules that have been applied. So kind of back to what Peter was showing of turning it off for an entire page, you can turn off individual rules. Now, the thing to remember about the inspector is if you're playing around with it, as soon as you refresh, they're gone. That's the slate is wiped clean. So if you want to save these rules later to put them in the customizer, you got to make sure you copy them out first. So that's, again, key thing to remember. So just a real quick example of font stuff. Like I said, these days, for the most part, you're probably not going to be changing fonts through custom CSS. You're probably going to use your theme. Hopefully your theme will give you some options. And if I look at, I'm using right now, which theme I'm using? I'm probably using the 2020 theme. I'm using, 2021 theme. So this is a non-block theme. Most themes these days in the customizer will give you something like typography and colors. And this one's maybe not so great. Most like cadence and the other ones, they'll let you change it within the theme and the theme setting. So you don't ever need to go in here and change, do any CSS. Again, it's good to be aware of the fact that you can. So again, that's one example of one thing you can change is anything with typography. But let me show probably some more relevant examples. Let's look at things like layouts. So for example, so skipping that, let's look at this layout. So again, what I typically do is you just got to click somewhere within the section So I happen to know that this is really a row of 2 columns, but I don't, again, I want to play around with it, but I don't have to be specific yet. I can just click on this text and then go to inspect. And the cool thing is on the left-hand side here, just again, from a navigation standpoint, from the inspector tool, you can look at the inspector and view what your page will look like on, mobile devices, on tablets. Here's an iPad mini, here's an iPhone Pro, et cetera, et cetera. So CSS rules, we won't touch upon this today, we don't have enough time, but you can set CSS rules specific to device types. Those are called media queries. We're not going to really look at that too much. But what I'm going to show just a real quick example of here, I'm going to dump this down so I can see it, make it 50%, is, so what I want to do is I want to add a border, just something really simple. And let's say that your theme or whatever you're using doesn't give you that option to set borders. In fact, I think the Gutenberg for a long time didn't let you do that on like a block level, or depending on the block you're using. So what I want to do is I want to make sure I'm selecting the right element. So as you can see, as I hover my mouse over, this is really a column. This is the right-hand column. This is the left-hand column. I want to put the border up here, though. I want to put the border on the container above the column. So what I would do is to add a border, the properties of this would be border. Let's do border weight first, I think so. And I'm even going to my cheat sheet, so I kind of forget some of these things. So border weights. What's nice is this, again, the inspector has gotten a lot better in terms of just showing you stuff. So you can scroll through and see what are all the things I can do with borders. So I want to set my border, border width. I want to set my border width to thick. So there, it's added a border already. All right, that's cool. Let's change the style of the border. It's a border style, and then here I could say, do I want dotted, dashed, it's like grooved. I'll stick with something silly like dotted for now. And what you have to do here is you have to make sure you click on this to make sure it sets it. So there, border width, border style, and then I'll do border radius is the other one. Border radius. So border radius is going to set the corners. So let's do a border radius of 10 pixels. Or I'll do 30 pixels. So because I've done this one property, 30 pixels, this is applying it across the board, but you can actually, you see on this in the inspect tool, if I click on this, it's really applying left, right, top right, bottom left, bottom right, et cetera. So you can control it specifically if you want like a chopped border, et cetera, et cetera. So here's one example where your theme or your page builder may not give you that option out of the box. But this is something that you can do. Excuse me, this is something that you can apply yourself. So that's something, again, probably a practical thing you may or may not need, but just something to be aware of that you can do. Let me show a couple more examples. These are getting a little bit more complicated, but these are ones I think that especially people need to know about or can drive you nuts if you don't have a theme that lets you do these kind of adjustments. So this one, we're gonna look at this next section on this page, which is this guy right here. So I've got 3 columns of text, and I've added a background to the columns, but because the texts are like, there's no space there. I want to give a little breathing room to that text that's in the middle of these columns. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some padding to this. So what I want to do, this goes back to the parent-child discussion we had before. If I just add padding to this container, let's just say I'm going to add padding all around of 20 pixels. It's just changing that one column because I've gotten to such a specific level of that particular column. It's not applying to any of the children or peers, any of that kind of stuff. But that's not what I want. I want every one of these guys to have some space around it. So I need to make sure that I'm applying the rule at the right level. So in this case, I'm applying it to the row. I'm applying it to the container of those 3 columns. Again, this is just something to be aware of. As you're playing around with CSS, make sure you're selecting and applying things correctly. So let me say, in this case, I want to say padding all around, let's say 10 pixels. So as you can see, this would actually apply to even to the level above it. So it's again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time playing around with this, but you're adding, make sure that you're putting in your spacing at the right spot, not just at the most specific spot. Just looking at the time for a second. And then this other example I'll show you, let me refresh. So everything I've done so far has been in the browser. It's all gone now. Once I've removed those are all gone. Another thing I find quite often from a positioning standpoint is things like this. So let's say, for example, if I'm using a theme, or maybe this is a background image and I have some headlines above it, and I want these things centered. For a long time, I think even the that cover block with Gutenberg wouldn't let you do this. So let's say I want to center the text inside of here. Just another property to be aware of is text alignment. So again, I'm going to select the container, so where everything is above it, and I can say text align center. So now you can see all that text below it now has been centered just with one line of code. So again, some powerful things of centering. Where I get frustrated a lot of times if you're not using Page Builder is positioning things. Like I want to have, something in a column, I want this thing in the middle, I want this thing up above, et cetera, et cetera. So that's where you play around with padding. Page builders like Divi and those, they let you drag elements and do some of the stuff. But again, if you don't have a page builder, you don't want a page builder, this is the way to do it as well. Just let me show you two other kind of quick examples. This is probably another common scenario where you've got something where it's 2 columns and you have 2 buttons on the bottom, and you're like, I want the buttons to line on the bottom. I don't want them like goofy, staggered like this. So this one's a little bit more complicated. So I'm going to show this example in the customizer because I think I've cheated a little bit and added the code already. Yeah, here we go. So what I'm doing, I'll show you the CSS a little bit. So before this, I've added a class. Remember, Peter talked about you can add classes to elements in WordPress. So I've added this class called bottom aligned column. I made up the name, so I came up with my own name. And what it's going to do is it's going to turn this whole thing into what's called a Flexbox container. And we don't have enough time to go deeply into Flexbox, but the idea of Flexbox is it came around, I think, with CSS 3.0, but it basically lets you position things in a lot of different ways. So rather than just having text flow inline, you can start moving things around. You can control how elements are laid out. So in this example, I first need to apply that flex property, and then I can start doing things. So I'm going to start like aligning pieces to the bottom. So just to show you real quickly, I'm going to get rid of my comment. And another best practice is, if you're like me, and you do add CSS on occasion for something strange like this, add comments. Otherwise, you'll look at this later and say, why did I do that? What was the point of that? So a comment flag in CSS, just is a slash and an asterisk. This is the easiest way to do it. But if you see, maybe I was blathering for a second. If you saw, what happened was with these couple lines, now my buttons are aligned. My buttons are aligned on the bottom. So I'll publish that so you can see it. So that's a cool one. This final one I'll do is something similar. So let's say you're using a plugin. This is another classic example, I think, where you'll need to use CSS on occasion, is if you want to style something that a plugin is outputting. So in this example, I think this is Fluent Forms I have. But let's say I want these fields, and I won't show this completely, but let's say, this is a form, a simple contact form, but what if I want all these 3 fields together on one line? I don't want them, on separate rows. So with one simple line of CSS, if I can remember the CSS real quick, and I need to get to the right spot. Again, this is always the thing. I need to get up to, I think it's up to the form level. I can say, what is it? Display flex. So there, just display flex. There's more styling to be done. You can see it's still ugly, but let's say one thing I could do within Flex, and this is a cool thing too. This is added within Chrome. All the Flex type properties now have these little visual things, which is really neat. So you can see if I want to change the Flex direction, and again, you can play around with these. Let me find the one I want, which is, I think it's Flex End. Align items at the end. Now it's moved this button down, so everything is hugging the bottom of this container. So again, you'd still need to do some styling to space things out, but just with one line, suddenly you can change the entire flow of everything. And final one, this is the trick of, what if I want to hide something? So let's say this has a caption. Again, maybe this is outputted by a plugin. I don't want captions showing. There's no way to turn it off. My very simple line of code. You again highlight the thing you want to do, and you say display none. There, it's gone. It's there. It's still there in the HTML, but it's not displaying on the screen. So simple, practical, hopefully tips. Again, where I tend to use CSS a lot these days is old websites, styling plugins that aren't friendly. Gravity Forms used to be notorious for. Gravity Forms, the newer versions, actually a lot more
Yeah.
drag and drop. It used to be horrible for that kind of stuff. And then also, as I said, just positioning, tweaking positioning of things. In mobile, we didn't cover mobile at all yet. In fact, that's probably leading into final thoughts. Were there any major questions that popped up, Peter, or should I continue?
No, we had a little sideline conversation, if we have a little bit of time, talking about what's coming up in 6.1 when it comes to and things like padding and borders and things like that.
Right.
Yeah.
So
And then one thing I would say that came to mind, and forgive me if I missed it, but one of the things when you're working in the inspector, if you get something that looks right, you can copy that, copy that code and drop it into one of the tools that we talked about. And by the way, off the side, don't use code snippets plugins. I'm gonna change that slide because it's not in any of them except for the one that I'm using, and I have a pro version. And yeah, just use a simple plugin, but the customizer is great for just a lot of the things that we're looking to do.
Right.
Okay, final thoughts.
Yeah, so final thoughts again, just hopefully you saw a few lines of CSS can really make a huge difference in styling, like the examples I showed and that Peter showed. But it's key. It can really be a little bit frustrating because CSS seems confusing, but just understand how those rules are being applied to an element. That's where the inspect tool is great. Practice using that, turn styles on and off. That's a great way to learn too. Turn them all off on an element and see which one is making it bold or red, etc. Plenty of great examples online. We have some great things in the resources, the W3 schools, etc. Some really more advanced topics. We've covered these in a few other talks, like the mobile talk we talked about. So mobile breakpoints. So that's another huge power of CSS. You can make your display look differently depending on the device type. And I always say mobile, but that back to accessibility, you can make things look different for a screen reader, for tablets, etc., all these different kind of things. A seriously advanced topic, which I'll admit I know this much to be dangerous, is CSS preprocessors. So people have decided to, just sort of like jQuery with JavaScript, people decided, oh, writing CSS is too complicated. Let's create another language on top of it, which is supposed to make it easier, but to me, it's a little bit crazy. So there's lots of other dialects of CSS besides kind of the plain vanilla one. Any other final thoughts, Peter? Is just showing the resources while we're doing this?
Yeah, the W3 schools CSS tutorial that allows you to go in and play with some things, and then experiment and see the impact of changing some lines. Is really good. Yeah, and if you want me to,
while you're
show CodePen, and then show the fun part of CodePen, and then maybe I'll grab the screen and show a couple things too, if we got time.
Let me do it with Hoverfly, because I think that's
and while Ray's bringing that up, if there's anything not related to CSS, I know we're refining this, how much time we make sure to allow ourselves, and we getting off to the start itself. But if there's any other questions, please put them in the chat. We'll see what we can do or follow up.
So real quick on this one too, this probably deserves its own kind of tools and tips discussion. So CodePen is another neat tool that lets you show a separation of you can play around with these, and people have saved pens is what they call these projects. So you can see other people's examples of, you can take your own HTML there on the left-hand side. You can apply CSS to it or JavaScript. We're not even getting into that. And it's all within this environment. So you can, again, it's a sandbox environment to try things out. And again, the cool thing is people have saved these projects where you can reference them and see some amazing stuff. I think if you go back, where was it? If you go back to the beginning here, search pens. I mean, sometimes they highlight them too. Yeah, here's some cool ones, like just single div CSS. This is all CSS.
Right. The code's above.
And here's the thing: just because you can do it CSS,
right,
doesn't mean you should. But, whatever the power of it. So.
But yeah, the amazing thing is if you scroll in the CSS. Oh, okay. The code there. Sometimes it can be. It has become its own game where there's so much math and kind of calculations go that you could do that whole how few lines of CSS can you make this like ridiculously complicated thing because of how you're writing that code. It gets crazy. It's really fascinating.
Cool. All right. So I'm looking at, I know we only have 15 minutes, so just some of the questions I'm bringing backwards.
Yeah.
Robert has an interesting one. Trying to download an image that you have permission for from the website, but right-clicking Save As is not possible. It's probably because there is something that's stopping you from saving it. And I forget what there's a command. I know there's plugins that try to prevent that. Again, all hope is not lost because everything.
Ray, there's a disable right click that is old. But
Yes.
you can't hide a picture. If you go in and look at the code, you can get the exact URL for the image.
Exactly.
You can't hide anything online.
In my case, I stumbled on the inspector and I have found the source of the image, but I don't think it's being prohibited from being downloaded, but the page is being displayed. It's in a carousel, or there's text overlays or something. So what I'm clicking on is not actually the image.
You may want to look at, make sure if it's in a carousel, then you almost have to, the thing about the inspect, unfortunately, you can pause it for carousels. Carousels are an animation, basically. That's all it's doing, is you have to find when it gets to the picture that you want, and you can pause it there and then get the source for it.
No, I've tried that. It's not that either. It's I could tell you the website. If
I was gonna say, where can you put it? Can you put it in the chat? If you put the URL in chat, I'll bring it up while we're looking at.
I'm the secretary for my Kiwanis Club in Weston, and so this is the Kiwanis International website. And sometimes there's an image there that I have permission to use. That
Let's Kiwanis.org. All right, let's take, and I'll share my screen in a second. While I'm looking at this, Peter, do you have an answer to Martha has a question about the CSS panel and the block property?
Yeah, I was about to send her, we'll get to her next.
Okay.
Basically, what is the question, but the CSS panel where you put in the CSS and then you have to write the code is what I'm guessing, but we'll have to look at it specifically.
So where is the picture that you want?
the picture of the lady and the child.
Oh, this one right here, okay.
But without the text overlay or.
Right. So let's just take a quick look at this. There's a couple of sneaky ways we can do this, but the simplest one I'd say is, all right, let's look at this. It's a div hero title. And is that image probably, it's up here. It says hero container, mom and kid on a bike. There it is. There's the URL. And there's the source.
Yeah.
There it is.
There it is.
Let me show you that again in slow motion.
Yeah.
So what I did was because part of it too, this is a background image. So this is another good lesson of, let me start over again. So what I first did was, you just need to put your cursor somewhere on the image, and I right clicked.
Okay.
And then I did inspect.
Uh-huh.
And then it's dropping me into this container. So as I hover my mouse over, this is the wrong spot. The background image is actually, the background is actually above it. So if you go above it to this class, you can see over here, it says, and as I'm reading it, I can even see the URL. It's HTTP Kiwanis magazine, hero images, mom and kid on bike. To get the real image over here on the right-hand side, as I hover my mouse over, again, this is within Chrome, it shows you the source. It shows you that resolved URL. So then my cursor turns into a little hand. It's really neat. I love inspect. You click on this, there it is. And now I can save this, save image to my desktop.
The trick in what Ray just did, and it's a little tricky, but the trick was whenever he put his mouse on a piece of the code, look at the blue overlay on the picture.
Yeah.
And as you go down, you see the green, go down just a little bit. You see the green lines around it. It's one line after what you got highlighted, Ray.
Yeah, this one right here.
Yeah. And you see the green, that means you're not getting the whole picture.
Yeah.
Okay.
And when the blue increases, then you've got the picture, then go find it. It's the blue shadow is key.
And this goes back to the structure of HTML. So this div is just a way to organize things, but this div is contained within another div with another div, and it's all turtles all the way to the above. So you basically want to find the one above it. So this guy up top is that's the background image. So the other, just for people, again, not that no sales promotions, the cheap and quick and dirty way I would get these is Hoverify tool. It's a fantastic tool now. You can grab all the assets. You can grab all the assets from the page and basically download them all this way. So that's another nice way to do it, a lazy way.
Thank you.
Yep. All right, what else we got for?
All right, and yeah, so we had the question, Martha, what were you asking specifically?
Hi, so I'm editing a post, and then I want to edit the select a block, and then in the block properties, it's additional CSS classes. So how do I use that? Do I write it? Like I create the class somewhere and then put it in there to apply it to that specific block?
Yeah, so what you're putting in that you are actually, that's your name in the example Ray was giving. So you could call it, Martha's red block. I mean, that you're giving it the class, the selector, and then you write the code for it in your customizer as an additional CSS, or if you use one of the plugins or the different options that we gave. But yeah, that is where you get to name that thing very, very specifically. Ray, you want to bring it up, or do you want?
Yeah. I just got in. Give me 1 second. I'm just showing because I need a block theme. So, Martha, you were asking specifically like for a theme that's using Gutenberg, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So if you look at this theme, let's say I want to apply a style to this heading, and this. Yeah. So we're using Cadence. So maybe the theme is a little bit different, but in Cadence, if you look under Advanced, it says additional CSS classes. So in here, you would not write the CSS rule. You would be able to say, like, for example, remember I had mine of, let's say I want to make headlines. We'll do this real quick. Headline red. So I just made that up. That's my name. Headlines red. At this point, headlines red isn't going to do anything. But I'm going to update this page, and then let's view the page. So right now there's a class being applied, but there's no code, there's no declaration or rule for it. Let's say I want to actually apply a rule now. So the way I would do that is I'm going into the customizer, simple CSS, and let's say, I don't know what simple CSS, that's weird. Additional CSS.
Yes, simple is one of the plugins I was trying.
Oh, okay. So I called it what, headlines or headline? Well, we'll find out. Headline red. Color red. Did that work, or is it headlines? It's headlines. There we go. Headlines.
There you go.
So I hit the S. Now this is where the rule. This is where the declaration occurs. So now if I wanted other headlines or other text to be read, I would just basically take this class without the dot. This is another syntax thing that I missed. When you're putting it into the page or the section, that advanced section in WordPress, you don't put the dot in. The dot is just there, that's a CSS thing, not a WordPress thing.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, the block is where you give it the name of the class, and then in additional CSS is where you then define what that is.
Right.
And remind me again, is that a child's theme when I'm editing the customizer?
No,
it's theme level.
It's WordPress is your theme is basically applying that. It's doing it without the need for a child theme. I'm still back to, we talked about child themes a long time ago.
Yeah.
These days, personally, I haven't created a child theme in years. And it's mainly because a lot of the stuff I was using child themes for was styling. And in my opinion, styling is easier just doing in the customizer. It's more visible. I've never had performance problems and all that. Child themes to me are still more important if you're adding functionality, if you're changing functions.php, or you're doing a lot more complex. Where the customizer falls apart, as Peter showed, is you start having a ton of rules of CSS. Yeah, it's a bit difficult to manage inside the customizer.
Eventually, isn't the customizer going to go away?
They say that, but even the block themes, they still give you that ability. Even in the 2022 theme, you still need a place to put your CSS.
Yeah, Ben Rittner, who's like the godfather of Cadence, says nobody needs a child theme, and I respectfully disagree. I'd like to bring up a question that was asked earlier. I didn't ask it, but I want to make sure it gets answered.
Sure.
Had to do with automatic updates. I know that when you build the site, when you first set it up, you usually get an option. Do you want to do automatic updates or only on minor releases? Now, that's fine when you're first launching a site, but the site's already there. And now you're a little afraid of 6.1 and you'd rather wait. Where do you tell a WordPress site that's already built not to do updates either at all or for at least major update? Don't do major updates. How would you do that to an already built site? I think that was the earlier question. Then there's also the opportunity to turn off minor updates, but major updates are the question.
My answer, and I'll let Peter answer his, is first off, it depends on your hosting. You know, that's one of the things you got to look at too. If you're in a managed hosting environment, sometimes you have less control than you think.
You have to tell SiteGround per site to
Yeah.
turn off updates, but
Or SiteGround or GoDaddy. I hate to say the G word, but you know, again, I work with clients who have stuff on GoDaddy in a managed environment, or Liquid Web was another one too. I forget what they're called now, but it's
so
basically-
if you could do it yourself, where would you do it? I know where you do it, but you go ahead.
where would I turn off automatic updates?
You do it in the config file, but I wouldn't let
Yeah.
I wouldn't encourage anybody to do that.
Exactly.
Is there a
Yeah.
place that a civilian can go to do that?
I don't think there's one.
I'm gonna,
Go ahead.
I'm checking.
Stall while you're stall. I'm looking at. Is there a place to actually turn it off?
I'm not sure if you can do it in
I think you
PHP
can.
MyAdmin. I think you actually have to go to the config file, which is like a very dangerous place.
I will bet you, Sue, and again, I will not a giant wager. I will bet you there's a plugin that will that will prevent that. There probably
There's a
is probably
plugin for
stop.
that.
There must be a plugin for that. Stop.
The
WordPress
answer
core updates.
to the question really right now is maybe it can be done, but you really need somebody who knows what they're doing to do it. If you
Yeah.
want to touch the config file, the best way to turn off updates, we turn off major updates. We allow minor updates.
Yeah.
And I'm not turning that on for, it's like a Microsoft update. You wait 2 or 3 weeks and see
Yeah.
whose computer it breaks first.
Yeah, so yeah, for the security one, that's always on by default. And the major updates you can turn on and off under updates, right? So under the dashboard, and then you have your updates and you can kind of switch back and forth. There is a plugin called Easy Updates Manager.
There you go. There's a plugin for that.
Yeah, disable all updates with one click.
Does it
Yeah.
allow you to disable only major updates?
Enable automatic updates with one deeply customized. Let's see, use logs, hide, plugin, select which plugins and themes can be automatically updated. Disable core plugin theme and translation updates. It to allow only is built into core though. That's
Yeah. I
Yeah.
can do it from the security plugin I use. iThemes lets you do that. But
well, if
I
you go
was-
to dashboards and updates, like I'm looking at
Are
our
you talking about like a regular website? Just go to the login and go to the dashboard?
dashboard
Should-
under.
Put that on screen,
Okay, let me do that.
please.
Okay.
Sorry.
Let's do that. No, we should do this.
I don't think I don't think it lets you get that granular on it, but I'll let you share.
I don't remember whose question it was. It might have been Martha's, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, it was mine.
Okay.
Yeah, and then if we have time, I want to talk about that 6.1 thing because I spent much of today. I wasted much of today looking.
I sat through an hour of it. Yeah, I understand.
Yeah, but so one of the problems I'm having with as they're talking about it is that they're already like we're only looking at like you know the 2022 theme or now the 2023 theme. Right? It's always in a block theme. It's like yeah, go do that in your own theme. And you go none of that stuff works even with the updates. But we'll talk about that if we get to it. So all I was doing is looking at our dashboard. You see my screen right now?
Yep.
Uh-huh.
Okay, update, and then current version, This site is automatically kept up to date with maintenance and security releases of WordPress only. Enable automatic updates of all new versions. And this is a toggle.
Oh, okay. I didn't know, yeah, I guess,
Now it
yeah.
says switch to automatic updates for maintenance, and now I can toggle it back.
Okay.
So switching it means you're not allowing major updates.
Right, right.
Martha, I
Yeah.
hope that makes sense. That could have been written in better English.
Yeah, exactly. So if you
To
see,
do the opposite, to not to
yeah,
do.
if you see enable, this button will enable. So right now, automatic updates for all new versions, which are the major versions, is disabled. Clicking on it will enable it.
That's really bad communication.
Yeah, kind of.
It's good that it's there, though. Yeah, I
You
guess
know,
I never
I-
clicked that.
I would
It
have
should be a
gone,
checkbox that
Yeah.
says, you know,
I
So
would
it
have
had nothing to
gone,
do with config file or your hosting then?
I don't know if that
Not yet.
option's always
Well-
available depending on your hosting. I think that could be
will
the issue too.
will this override something like SiteGround or GoDaddy's default? We're gonna update you and help you out?
let me try to do something off on the side here and I'll let you know that.
Because
I was
in
gonna
the
change-
config, even in the config file, I had to tell SiteGround 1 ticket per site to turn off the updates. They were overriding my choices.
Yeah.
I'm going up on the side, I'm going off to a Flywheel site. Flywheel is managed hosting.
Yeah, I don't have that option. So Sue, my example site is on SiteGround, and that one I showed does not have that switch to turn it on and off. So yeah, depending on your hosting company, they
SiteGround knows best.
yeah.
Well,
I
it's
don't
funny.
know, web developers are control freaks. I freely admit to it. And
Yeah.
not having control over something that important annoys the bejesus out of me.
Yeah. Yeah, just I know, just real quick time check. I know we're kind of starting to run over
Oh.
here. Do we have any
Oops.
last things? I want to be respectful of people's time. And then, did you have some last thing you wanted to show, Peter? I thought you said, or
Yeah, am I still sharing the screen?
yep.
All right, so we were looking at this, which is, this is 6.1 beta, release candidate, whatever it is. This is what's coming up in November, everybody.
Oh,
So,
good.
and
Which we may
one of the
actually spend, that's cut you short there, Peter. I think we may spend a little bit of time. I know we have a potential guest speaker next month, but maybe we can spend like 10-15 minutes on this too next
I
month.
think so. I think so. And then what I was doing was I was over here under posts and I was experimenting. It's literally in the last hour, they went to release candidate 2, which is good. And I was saying, okay, so heading, here's a heading block on this page. And the new thing that everyone's going to be happy about is under dimensions. And so dimensions adds padding, and depending on what you're on, you might get so padding and margin options, right? But what I was experimenting with is if let me go back to here and back to here, I wanted to say, oh, I was going to tell everybody, isn't this fantastic? And I went under themes, and then I went to, we've been using Cadence, so I'm going to activate Cadence. And I came back to this page, I refreshed it. I think it was Cadence, because then I had to, so now, and by the way, CSS, one of the things that's a great improvement over anyone who's been doing this for years is good themes also apply it to your editor. So, you saw the fonts change and things like that. So dimensions padding, that one had margin, I think, or this one. One of these had, so it's inconsistent, to say the least. And I went to another theme that I had, Bloxy was loaded. And when I activated that, let's see if we have any changes here. See, there's no dimensions.
Yeah.
So it's theme dependent, and it's based on whether the theme, a classic theme, is using theme.json, which is part of the new thing, not to get too technical, and then is enabling these things. So I went to I said, oh, this is going to be great, because it's another thing why you don't need a plugin. It depends on what theme you're using.
So in
So-
summary,
and-
don't get too excited about the new features.
Yeah.
And if Cadence is missing it, if you just switch that paragraph to advanced text, it'll all be in there.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
so the theme people need to talk to the WordPress core people.
Yeah,
Agreed.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's true. The idea is that if, how close can we keep going back to core stuff? And the promise is, and with new block themes, you're going to be able to do a heck of a lot now that they are, and with the really good thing that there will and should be consistency, right? We're going to start seeing things in the same place from block to block. And, that dimension section that's giving us margin, and there's also a border under dimensions. Border is there and border radius, but not here. I think if I go back to real quick.
Why do they make dimensions for that term? That's
I
just
know.
so counterintuitive, like a layout, alignment.
I know.
Anything.
If I go back to now, this is a block theme. And if I go to that paragraph under dimensions, margin padding, and then what you'll also find under, let's look at this, this is different. So that's where they work on consistency. The border, what's kind of interesting with border, let's see if heading, I think, has it. No, maybe the new thing. You'll see borders are now being set in theme JSON, and they will be given a number value, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then you set in theme JSON what that number actually is, 10 pixels, 20 pixels, 30 pixels, 40 pixels. So it's going to take a while. It is not magic yet for the everyday user. Let's just
a good segue. You still may need to know some CSS, which hopefully you've learned a little bit tonight.
Drop microphone.
Wrap it up. All right. Well, thank you everyone for sticking around a little bit late too. Sorry about the bumpy start for folks who had a little bit of trouble with the admin thing. We're still working through the process. Again, if you missed it, we're trying to improve a little bit of security and stuff on Zoom for some knuckleheads, but we'll try to make it so it doesn't make your lives a lot harder. So thanks for
Can I add something
participating.
before we get off the meeting?
Sure. Yep.
I'm going to throw a link into a webpage site that a gentleman by the name of Eagle out in California has created. And he's got all kinds of meetups that you can go to and all kinds of information that he's gleaning out of chats that he's been involved in. And he keeps adding to it continually. I don't know if anybody's got an interest in it, but if you want if you want to do it, it's go out and look at it. And if you want to have something added to it, contact him.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, it's funny. I just met Eagle 2 weeks ago on a group chat, or a group Zoom. So that's great. I'll talk to him about it too.
Nice.
Perfect.
He's very knowledgeable.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. All right. Thanks everyone. Like I said, we'll send out the recording afterwards along with the slides and links and notes. And thanks again, everyone. Like I said, hopefully next month we're hoping to have a guest speaker on a very good relevant topic. We just got to get our schedules in place. Give Peter and I a break from talking for 1 month would be nice.
We could get in a little.
We're open. All right. So thanks again, everyone. Have a good night. Thanks for
Thank
joining us
you.
again.
Bye.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.